He thought cruelty was a game when he raised a racket on a private tennis court, laughing as a frightened puppy cowered and a young woman begged him to stop. He believed money meant power and silence meant safety. He was wrong. From the edge of the court stood a former Navy SEAL and his German shepherd, still watchful, unafraid. In that moment, arrogance met courage, and truth stepped into the light. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more stories of faith, justice, and hope. The afternoon heat pressed down on the tennis courts like a held breath, turning the air above the green and blue surface into a trembling mirage. The private Silver Bay Tennis Club was immaculate in the way only money could afford. The nets were perfectly aligned, the white boundary lines freshly painted, the practice walls scrubbed clean of yesterday's scuffs. Palm trees stood like indifferent sentries along the fence, their shadows thin and sharp. For members, it was a sanctuary. For workers, it was an endurance test. Michael Carter walked slowly along the edge of Court 3, a dented metal cart rattling behind him, its crate filled with cracked tennis balls and half-empty water jugs. He was just over 40, tall and broad-shouldered, with a build that spoke of years of discipline rather than comfort. His hair was cut short in a military style, dark with threads of gray at the temples. A rough, neatly trimmed beard framed a face marked by sharp angles and a faint scar near his left eyebrow, an old reminder from a life he rarely spoke about. His clothes were plain, a faded work shirt, worn jeans, boots with scuffed toes. Nothing about him suggested heroics. He looked like a man who had learned how to disappear. At his side walked Rex. The German shepherd was 7 years old, large and powerfully built, his black and tan coat sun-faded along the spine. One ear stood perfectly upright while the other bent slightly at the tip, a small imperfection that somehow made him look wiser. Rex moved with calm purpose, eyes always scanning, tail low but relaxed. He was gentle with children, wary with strangers, and utterly devoted to Michael. Wherever Michael went, Rex followed, not out of obedience alone, but out of choice. Michael had not planned to be here. Life rarely unfolded according to plan anymore. After leaving the Navy SEALs, he had drifted through short-term jobs, construction, night security, warehouse loading. The money barely covered rent on a narrow room behind a mechanic's shop, but it kept food in Rex's bowl. That mattered. Rex had been his constant through the long nights when sleep refused to come, through the mornings when guilt weighed heavier than exhaustion. Near the far practice court, a young woman bent to collect balls, moving with quiet efficiency. Her name was Sarah. She was in her mid-20s, slender and slightly underweight, with sun-bronzed skin and brown hair pulled into a loose ponytail that slipped down her neck as she worked. She wore a club-issued white tank top and navy skirt, both faded from countless washings. Her face was soft but serious, with tired eyes that suggested she was used to being overlooked. Sarah rarely spoke unless spoken to, and when she did, her voice carried a careful politeness shaped by years of needing this job. Hidden behind a bench near the fence was her secret. A small German shepherd puppy, barely 3 months old, lay curled in the shade of a gym bag. His coat was a darker, brown than Rex's, still fluffy with baby softness. His paws were oversized, his ears not yet fully committed to standing upright. His name was Milo. Sarah had found him abandoned 2 weeks earlier near a bus stop, shivering in a cardboard box. She had no family left to call, no savings to lean on, and nowhere to leave him during her shifts. So she brought him here, praying no one would notice. They did. A group of young players had claimed the adjacent court for private training. They were loud, well-dressed, and careless in the way only the very rich could afford to be. At their center was Ethan Cole, early 20s, tall, blond, with a permanent smirk carved into his handsome face. His posture radiated entitlement. His laughter carried easily across the courts. The others followed his lead, laughing a second too late, watching his reactions before forming their own. "Hey, ball girl," Ethan called, bouncing a tennis ball against his racket with lazy precision. "You're a little slow today." Sarah flinched, but forced a polite smile, quickening her pace. One of the girls snickered. Another young man deliberately hit a ball past her, making her jog awkwardly to retrieve it. The teasing escalated, subtle enough to avoid intervention, cruel enough to sting. Then Milo whimpered. The sound was small but sharp in the still air. Ethan's gaze snapped toward the bench. "What's that?" he said, squinting. Sarah's heart dropped. She moved instinctively, stepping between the bench and the court. "It's nothing, sir," she said quickly. "Please, let me finish my shift." Ethan walked closer. The others followed, curious now. He leaned down and spotted Milo's dark eyes peeking out. His smile widened, not with warmth, but with amusement. "You brought a dog onto a private court?" he scoffed. "Unbelievable." Milo, sensing tension, stumbled forward, tail wagging uncertainly. He reached the painted line at the edge of the court and sat, tongue lolling. "Get it away from me!" Ethan snapped. He lifted his racket, half joking, half not. Sarah rushed forward, dropping to her knees, arms spread protectively. Michael stopped walking. Rex froze beside him, ears pricked forward, a low vibration building in his chest. Michael's eyes locked onto the raised racket, onto Sarah's trembling shoulders, onto the puppy too young to understand fear. Something old and heavy shifted inside him, the same instinct that had once pulled him through chaos without thought. He stepped onto the court. "Put it down," Michael said calmly. The voice was quiet, but it carried. Ethan turned, annoyed. "Who are you?" Michael didn't answer. He placed himself between Sarah and the group, his body a solid wall. Rex sat at his heel, unmoving, eyes fixed on Ethan. The dog did not bark. He didn't need to. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then Ethan laughed. "You think you scare me?" That night, long after, the courts emptied and the heat finally loosened its grip, Michael drove back to his rented room. Rex rode quietly in the passenger seat. As Michael parked under the flickering light of the lot, Rex stiffened. Michael followed his gaze and crouched beneath the car. His hand closed around a small black device, blinking faintly red. A tracker. Michael crushed it in his palm. As he stood, he felt eyes on him. Across the lot, near the street lamp, a figure turned away and disappeared into the dark. Morning arrived without mercy. The sun climbed fast over Silver Bay, bleaching the tennis courts into sharp planes of color and heat, as if nothing unsettling had happened the night before. From the outside, the club looked unchanged. Trim hedges, swept walkways, flags hanging limp in the still air. But beneath that polish, the tone had shifted. People spoke more quietly. Eyes lingered longer. Whispers moved faster than tennis balls. Sarah felt it the moment she stepped through the staff gate. She was small-framed and slightly stooped from carrying weight that had never been physical alone. Her brown hair was pulled into a tighter ponytail than usual, as if discipline might hold the world together. Dark circles lived beneath her eyes, and when she bent to set Milo's crate behind the benches, her hands trembled despite her effort to steady them. Milo, 3 months old, soft-coated, all knees and curiosity, whined once and then settled, trusting her in the uncomplicated way only the young can. She barely made it halfway to court, too, before Mr. Hall called her name. George Hall was the club's operations manager, a man in his late 50s with thinning gray hair combed carefully to disguise its retreat. His posture carried the careful diplomacy of someone who had spent decades bending without appearing to bow. His polo shirt was pressed, his voice measured, and his eyes never quite met hers. "Sarah," he said, folding his hands, We've had complaints. Her chest tightened. I can explain. I'm sure you can, he interrupted gently. Too gently. But rules are rules. Animals aren't permitted on the grounds. Liability issues. She thought of Ethan's raised racket, of Michael's calm voice cutting through the heat. They threatened him, she said quietly. They hurt him. Mr. Hall exhaled and looked past her toward the courts, where Ethan and his friends were already laughing, fresh outfits immaculate, confidence untouched. You're dismissed, he said, effective immediately. The words landed with dull finality. Sarah nodded, swallowing everything she wanted to say. She returned to the bench, lifted Milo's crate, and walked away, without looking back. No one stopped her. Michael heard about it an hour later. He stood by the maintenance shed, Rex at his side, listening to one of the groundskeepers relay the news in a low voice. The groundskeeper, a middle-aged man with sunburned arms and a permanent squint, shook his head. Unfair, he muttered. But that family, they make problems disappear. Michael thanked him and turned away. His face showed nothing, but something inside him hardened. Rex sensed the shift and pressed closer, shoulder brushing Michael's leg in quiet solidarity. By noon, Sarah sat on the curb near the employee parking lot, a cardboard box at her feet, holding everything she owned that mattered. Milo slept curled inside the crate, breathing softly. Tucked to his side, heat rose off the asphalt, and she felt smaller than she ever had, as if the world had decided she was surplus. A dark SUV pulled up beside her without warning. The window rolled down to reveal a man in his mid-40s with sharply cut features and hair streaked silver at the temples. His suit was charcoal gray, expensive without being flashy. His eyes were calm, appraising. This was Victor Langley. He smiled like a professional kindness. Sarah Mitchell, he said, already knowing the answer. I represent the Cole family. She stood, instinctively stepping between him and Milo. I don't want trouble, she said. Neither do we, Victor replied smoothly. That's why I'm here. He handed her an envelope. It was thick. A goodwill gesture. Medical costs, relocation assistance, a fresh start. She didn't take it. What's the catch? Victor's smile tightened. Just enough. You sign a statement confirming yesterday's incident was a misunderstanding. No social media, no interviews. Then you walk away. Sarah looked down at Milo, at the faint bandage still wrapped around his leg from the clinic Michael had taken them to after the incident. She felt the familiar pull of desperation. Rent overdue, savings non-existent, future frighteningly blank. For a heartbeat, the envelope felt heavier than truth itself. She shook her head. No. Victor sighed, disappointed rather than angry. Think carefully, he said. People like you don't win these fights. He drove away without another word. Michael watched from across the lot. He had arrived just in time to see the exchange, the envelope, Sarah's refusal. He didn't approach until the SUV disappeared down the road. You okay? He asked, his voice steady. Sarah nodded, though tears clung stubbornly to her lashes. They tried to buy it, she said, like it never happened. Michael crouched to Milo's level, letting the puppy sniff his fingers. Some things shouldn't be erased, he said quietly. He looked at Sarah. I know a vet who won't ask questions or charge what he shouldn't. That afternoon, they drove inland, away from the manicured coast, to a modest clinic tucked between a hardware store and a shuttered bakery. The sign read, Miller Veterinary Care. Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic and pine cleaner. Dr. Thomas Miller emerged from the back, tall and wiry despite his age, with white hair that refused to lie flat and eyes that missed nothing. His hands bore the faint scars of an old life in combat medicine, though his movements were gentle. He examined Milo carefully, nodding. He's tough, he said. Like you. Michael paid without comment. Sarah protested once, then stopped. Gratitude sat heavy in her chest. The quiet didn't last. That evening, as Michael drove back toward his rented room, he noticed a familiar pattern. Headlights that stayed behind him through 2 turns too many. He slowed. The car slowed. He turned sharply onto a side street. The car followed, then backed off. At home, Michael checked his vehicle again, methodically. He found nothing new, but the absence didn't ease his mind. He packed a small bag anyway. Old habits resurfaced easily. When he returned to the parking lot the next morning, Sarah was waiting with Milo and the box. Her voice shook. "They came back," she said. "Different man. Same offer. Bigger threat." Michael didn't hesitate. "Get in the truck," he said. "You're not staying here." They drove inland again, farther this time, to a small cabin Michael rented on the edge of town. A place meant for quiet, not refuge. The cabin was simple. 1 bedroom, a wood stove, a porch that looked out over scrub and pine. Rex explored the perimeter with practiced care, tail low, alert but calm. Milo watched him with admiration bordering on worship. As dusk settled, the world seemed to exhale. Sarah sat at the small table, hands wrapped around a mug of tea, Milo sleeping at her feet. "I don't know how to thank you," she said softly. Michael shook his head. "You don't owe me anything." He paused, then added, "But you should know, this won't stop them." Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the distant sound of tires on gravel. Rex's ears snapped forward. Michael reached for the light switch and hesitated, listening. Somewhere beyond the trees, an engine idled, then cut. Sarah looked up, fear flickering across her face. "Michael," she whispered. He met her gaze, calm but resolute. "Stay inside," he said. "Whatever happens next, we face it awake." Night came down hard on the cabin, not gently the way evenings usually settled in that part of the county, but fast and heavy, as if the sky itself had chosen a side. Wind moved through the pines in low, restless waves, and clouds erased the moon before it had a chance to rise. The world beyond the porch light felt closer than it should have, pressing inward with every creak of wood and rustle of brush. Sarah sat at the small kitchen table, her slender frame wrapped in a borrowed flannel jacket that swallowed her shoulders. In the yellow glow of the lamp, her brown hair looked darker, loose strands slipping free from the ponytail she'd abandoned hours ago. Her face, usually careful and composed, showed the strain she could no longer hide. Eyes too alert, hands clasped tight around a mug gone cold. Milo slept at her feet, his small chest rising and falling, one back leg still wrapped in a clean white bandage. Even in sleep, his paws twitched, chasing something only he could see. Michael stood near the window, broad back half-turned to the room. He had changed since they arrived. Not visibly, perhaps, but something in him had settled into place, like armor pulled from long storage. His posture was loose but ready, weight balanced, senses outward. The scar near his eyebrow caught the lamplight as he tilted his head, listening past the wind. Years ago, in a desert half a world away, that same stillness had kept him alive. It had never really left him. Rex lay near the door, massive body relaxed but coiled beneath the surface. His black and tan coat blended with the shadows, but his eyes reflected light when he shifted his gaze, tracking sounds humans missed. He did not bark. He never barked unless it mattered. "You don't have to stay awake," Sarah said quietly, more to fill the silence than because she believed it. "I can take first watch." Michael shook his head once. "You've been running for days," he said. "Get some rest." She tried to smile, failed, and looked down at Milo instead. "They won't stop, will they?" "No," Michael said. He didn't soften it. Lying would have been kinder, but kindness built on falsehood had never saved anyone he knew. "But they'll make mistakes." The first sound came just after midnight. Gravel shifted at the edge of the drive, slow and deliberate. Rex rose to his feet without a sound, tail stiff, ears forward. Michael lifted a hand, palm down, a silent command Rex obeyed instantly. He moved to the breaker box by the door and flipped the switch. The cabin went dark. Sarah's breath caught, but she did not scream. In the sudden blackness, she could hear her own heartbeat, Milo's small whimper, the wind outside. Michael's voice came low and calm from the darkness. "Bathroom? Lock the door. Take Milo. Stay low." She did exactly that. In the narrow bathroom, she closed the door and slid down against the tub, clutching Milo to her chest. His warmth steadied her more than the tea ever had. From somewhere beyond the walls, she heard voices, men's voices, muffled, impatient. Outside, headlights swept briefly across the trees, then snapped off. 3 figures moved toward the cabin, their silhouettes indistinct in the darkness. They wore dark jackets and gloves, faces hidden beneath caps pulled low. They did not shout or announce themselves. They were not here to talk. Michael waited until the front door handle rattled once, twice. The third time came harder, a test of resistance. He did not move. The door shuddered, wood protesting under a heavy kick. The lock gave way with a sharp crack that echoed through the trees. The men spilled inside, flashlights cutting wild arcs through the dark. "Find the girl," one of them muttered. "Grab the phone." They never saw Michael step behind the first man, never heard Rex move. The struggle was swift and contained. No gunfire, no shouting, only the dull sounds of bodies colliding and breath leaving lungs in sharp bursts. Michael used momentum, angles, silence. Rex blocked the hallway, a living wall of muscle and teeth, growling low enough to vibrate the floorboards. One man broke for the back, panic overtaking bravado. He yanked open the bathroom door just as Sarah stood, fear giving way to something colder and steadier. Milo wriggled free and barked, a sharp, defiant sound for so small a body, lunging with the reckless courage of youth. The man stumbled, surprised, and that second was enough. Sarah brought the heavy metal waste bin down hard on his shoulder. He went down with a grunt, scrambling backward, eyes wide. The remaining men fled into the night. Michael didn't chase them. He dragged the one Rex had pinned into the center of the room and bound his hands with practiced efficiency. When the lights came back on, the cabin looked different. Furniture shifted, door splintered, proof of what had nearly happened. The man on the floor was young, barely 30, with a thin beard and eyes darting like a trapped animal's. "You're making this worse," he spat. "They won't let this go." Michael knelt so they were eye level. "Neither will we," he said. By morning, the air felt scrubbed clean, rain having passed through before dawn. Michael made calls, not to the local police first, but to people who still answered when he spoke. An old teammate, now working private security, a retired reporter who owed him a favor, a community advocate who had once been pushed aside by the same money that now pressed in on them. Sarah watched from the porch, Milo at her side, Rex standing sentinel. The fear was still there, but something else had joined it. Resolve. Later that day, they drove back toward town, not to hide, but to prepare. Michael visited a small electronics shop owned by an older man with nicotine-stained fingers and a sharp mind. He purchased compact cameras, motion sensors, cloud storage subscriptions. Nothing flashy, just enough. They stopped at the tennis club parking lot, careful, observant. Michael spoke with a groundskeeper who had worked there for 20 years, a man named Luis with a stooped back and quiet dignity. Luis's hands shook as he handed Michael a flash drive. "Security feed from the practice courts," he whispered. "I copied it before they erased everything." Sarah closed her eyes, emotion tightening her throat. That evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in soft bruised colors. Michael sat at the cabin table reviewing footage. The image was clear. Ethan's raised racket, Sarah shielding Milo, Michael stepping in. Truth preserved. Rex lay at his feet. Milo chewed clumsily on a rope toy, healing leg forgotten for the moment. Sarah watched them both, realizing that whatever happened next, she was no longer alone. Outside, a car slowed on the road, then continued on. Not tonight, but soon. Michael shut the laptop. They escalated, he said calmly. Now it's our turn. Morning light returned with a softer hand than the nights before, filtering through pine needles and dust motes inside the cabin. It painted the rough wooden table in gold and caught on the edge of Michael Carter's jaw as he shaved at the sink. Careful, methodical, the way he did everything when the stakes were real. At 40, his face carried lines that were not age alone, creases formed by vigilance, by years of scanning horizons for danger. He rinsed, dried, and stepped back into the main room where Rex waited, calm as ever, tail thumping once against the floor in greeting. Milo toddled behind, his healing leg wrapped but steady, ears still undecided about standing straight, eyes bright with faith. Sarah stood at the window, slender shoulders squared beneath a denim jacket she'd found in the cabin's closet. In daylight, her features softened, warm brown eyes, a straight nose, freckles dusted lightly across sun-bronzed skin. Her hair, usually bound tight for work, fell loose to her shoulders now, framing a face that had learned to hide fear behind courtesy. She watched the road with a focus she hadn't known she possessed weeks ago. The trembling had stopped. What replaced it wasn't bravado, but resolve. Michael closed the laptop he'd been reviewing since dawn. It's time, he said, voice even. Not to run, to tell it clean. They drove back toward town as the fog lifted from the low fields, the road familiar now. Michael had chosen the timing with care. Tuesday mornings were when the tennis club hosted its community clinics. Retirees, juniors, volunteers, witnesses by habit, cameras by chance. He parked on the public side, the truck's engine ticking as it cooled. Rex sat upright, composed. Milo, restrained by a soft sling, peered out, curious and brave. The Silver Bay Tennis Club looked as it always had. Hedges clipped, banners crisp, gates wide and welcoming. But the mood had changed. Word travels faster than money when fear loosens tongues. A small knot of people stood near the bulletin board, murmuring. When Sarah stepped through the gate, conversations paused. Not with disdain this time, but recognition. Ethan Cole arrived late, as usual. He wore white, immaculate shorts, polo pressed sharp enough to cut, his blonde hair styled into effortless confidence. He moved with the ease of someone accustomed to rooms rearranging themselves around him. When he saw Sarah, his mouth curved into a smile that was all surface. "You again," he said lightly, loud enough to carry. Michael didn't answer. He didn't need to. He nodded once to a woman standing near the courts. Marianne Brooks, late 50s, silver hair pulled into a neat bun, posture straight as a ruler. Marianne had taught tennis at the club for 20 years. Her eyes were sharp, her voice calm, and she had buried a husband who'd taught her the value of truth when it cost something. She lifted her phone and began recording. Michael opened the laptop. On a folding table near the benches, he connected a small speaker. The first clip played without commentary. Ethan's raised racket, Sarah's outstretched arms, Michael stepping into frame. The image was clear, the sound unmistakable. A ripple moved through the crowd, like wind through grass. Ethan laughed, sharp and brittle. "That's edited," he said. "Out of context." Michael clicked again. Audio filled the air. The lawyer's voice, smooth and transactional, offering money for silence. The name Cole landed with a dull thud among the murmurs. Ethan's face tightened. He glanced toward the clubhouse, toward help that did not arrive. Mr. Hall emerged instead, pale and sweating, hands wringing together. He tried to speak, faltered, and stepped aside as a man in a plain navy blazer approached. Sheriff Daniel Reyes was not tall, but he was solid, with dark hair cut close and a mustache that framed a mouth accustomed to difficult conversations. His eyes took in the scene with careful neutrality. He had grown up in this town. He knew its hierarchies. He also knew when the ground had shifted. "Mr. Carter," Reyes said, measured. "Miss Mitchell." He nodded to Sarah, respect plain. "We need statements." They gave them, calmly, clearly. The video files transferred to a secure drive. Luis, the groundskeeper, stood forward then, cap in his hands, back straight, despite the years bent over nets and lines. He spoke without flourish, explaining how he'd copied the feed before it vanished. 2 other staff members followed, voices shaking but steadying as they went. Patterns emerged, complaints buried, rules bent, silence purchased. Ethan's father arrived as the sun climbed higher, the car too sleek for the gravel, the driver opening the door as if on cue. Richard Cole stepped out in a tailored suit, gray hair perfect, smile practiced. He took in the crowd and the equipment with a calculating glance. "This is unnecessary," he said, voice carrying authority like a credential. "My son has been harassed." Michael met his gaze. He didn't raise his voice. "Your son raised a racket at a puppy," he said, "and at a woman protecting it." Richard's smile slipped. Just a fraction. Enough. Marianne Brooks spoke then, her voice clear as a bell. "We don't do this here," she said, gesturing to the courts. "Not anymore." Phones lifted, cameras rolled. The quiet majority found its spine. The sheriff raised a hand. "Mr. Cole," Reyes said, "we'll sort this at the station." Richard protested, indignation rehearsed and ineffective. Ethan said nothing. He stared at the ground, the first hairline crack in his armor visible to anyone looking. By afternoon, the club announced a suspension pending investigation. By evening, the local paper ran a sober headline. By night, the truth had found a rhythm it could keep. Michael didn't stay for applause. He packed the laptop, nodded to Luis, to Marianne, to the sheriff. Rex followed without command. Milo wagged at strangers, unaware of the weight lifting around him. They returned to the cabin as the sky blushed toward evening. Sarah moved differently now, taller, steadier. She knelt to Milo, laughing softly as he pawed her sleeve, then rested her hand on Rex's broad head, gratitude passing between species without translation. The phone rang as stars emerged. Sheriff Reyes's voice came through quieter. "It's moving," he said. "Charges, depositions. You did right." Michael looked out at the trees, at the long road beyond. "We'll be ready," he said. Outside, a car slowed on the distant road and passed on. No shadows lingered. Not tonight. The morning came quietly, as if the land itself were tired of shouting. Sunlight slid between the pines and rested on the cabin's porch, warming the boards where Rex lay stretched out, massive paws crossed with ceremonial calm. His coat gleamed healthier now, brushed by habit and care, and his eyes, dark, attentive, tracked the small movements of the world without urgency. Milo wobbled past him on 3.5 good legs, bandage gone, gait still uneven but improving, tail a metronome of optimism. He had grown in the weeks since the courts fell silent, longer in the body, steadier in the chest, ears finally choosing to stand. A young dog, learning what it meant to belong. Sarah stood at the doorway, breathing in the morning. She had changed, too. She was still slender, still careful in her movements, but the habit of shrinking had faded. Her hair, warm brown with hints of sun, fell to her shoulders now instead of being cinched tight for work. Her skin carried the healthy glow of fresh air and regular meals, freckles bright against the bridge of her nose. When she smiled, it reached her eyes. It was the look of a woman who had stopped apologizing for taking up space. Michael Carter finished loading the truck with the same precision he brought to everything. At 40, his strength was no longer loud, but it was complete, earned and maintained. The sharp lines of his face had softened in recent days, the permanent tension in his jaw loosening as the nights grew quieter. He wore a simple work shirt and jeans, sleeves rolled, beard trimmed. When he glanced at Sarah, there was no ownership in his gaze, only respect. They drove into town together, not with urgency, but with intention. The roads were familiar now, the storefronts less hostile. At Miller Veterinary Care, the bell over the door chimed its cheerful note. Dr. Thomas Miller emerged from the back, tall and wiry despite his years, white hair refusing discipline, eyes bright behind thick lenses. His forearms still bore the faded marks of an old life in field medicine, hands steady and kind. "Morning," he said, smiling at Milo first. "You look stronger already, soldier." Milo sat, proud, then promptly lost balance and bumped into Rex, who absorbed the collision with the patience of a saint. Dr. Miller chuckled and turned to Sarah. "I could use another set of hands," he said, voice gentle but certain. "You have a way with them. Calm travels." Sarah swallowed, emotion rising. "I'd work hard," she said. "I don't need." "I know," Dr. Miller said, cutting her off with kindness. "That's why I asked." The clinic became her anchor. She learned the rhythm of it quickly. The hush before exams, the careful reassurance to anxious owners, the quiet triumph when an animal relaxed under her touch. The blue scrubs fit her as if they'd been waiting. Milo became a fixture by the front desk, Rex a dignified presence at the threshold, greeting visitors, with measured approval. Michael took work where it made sense, not heroics, not headlines. He accepted a steady position maintaining the clinic grounds and coordinating security for the small network of community services that had rallied around the truth when it mattered. It paid enough. It mattered more. The investigation moved as investigations do, slowly, thoroughly, with consequences that arrived without spectacle. The tennis club instituted reforms. The family that had leaned on money learned the weight of record and witness. Ethan disappeared from the courts. The silence he'd relied on found other loyalties. On a bright afternoon, weeks later, the gates to the Silver Bay courts opened for something new. A community clinic. Free lessons for seniors, for kids, for anyone who had ever felt unwelcome behind those lines. Marianne Brooks stood near the baseline, silver hair in a neat bun, posture straight, eyes warm and unyielding. Sheriff Daniel Reyes watched from the shade, arms folded, mustache hiding a small smile. Luis, cap pushed back, strung a net with care. Michael didn't step onto the court. He leaned against the fence instead, Rex at his side, Milo tethered gently, tugging toward bouncing balls with unearned confidence. Sarah crossed the court with a basket of water bottles, her stride easy. When she caught Michael's eye, she smiled. Not in thanks, in recognition. As the sun lowered, turning the courts into a wash of gold, the crowd thinned. Applause faded into laughter. The air cooled. Michael gathered the dogs and started toward the truck. A breeze moved through the palms, carrying the faint sound of tennis balls and something steadier underneath, a town remembering itself. That evening, back at the cabin, they ate together at the small table. Simple food, easy conversation. Rex slept at Michael's feet. Milo curled against Sarah's chair, chin on her shoe. The quiet was not empty. It was earned. Later, on the porch, Michael looked out at the darkening trees. "I'll stay," he said, not as a promise but a decision. "At least a while." Sarah nodded. "We're better with you here," she said, honest and unafraid. The stars came out one by one. No cars slowed on the road. No shadows lingered. Rex rose, circled once, and settled. Milo yawned, long and content. Inside, the cabin held its breath and then released it. Not a fortress now, a home. Sometimes, miracles don't arrive as thunder from the sky or fire from the heavens. Sometimes, they come quietly, through the courage to stand up, the choice to protect the weak, or the love that refuses to look away. God works not only through angels, but through ordinary people who decide to do what is right when it costs them something. In a world that often rewards power and silence, truth becomes a miracle, and compassion becomes an act of faith. May this story remind us that no pain is unseen, no kindness is wasted, and no darkness is stronger than the light God places in a willing heart. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment with your thoughts, subscribe for more stories of faith and courage, and may God watch over you and your loved ones, guiding your steps and protecting your home.